We're going to continue now with our first panel. I want to invite you all. We are powering through because we have such a packed agenda this morning. Please feel free to step out, get some coffee, obviously use the restrooms. But we are powering right through, and we're going to save the networking for the end. We're going to go with our first panel right now, which is Making New Jersey More Rewarding for Technology. And I'm going to turn to our moderator for this panel, which is an expert in and of himself in growing technology ecosystems, social impact investing, and New Jersey government. Colin Newman leads Audible's Global Government Affairs Unit and is an advisor to Newark Venture Partners Tech Accelerator and has had a number of positions in and out of government. In fact, Colin and I worked together when we were both in government, helping to continue to move the state of New Jersey forward. And Colin, I'd invite you up to introduce the panel now and take us forward on making New Jersey more rewarding for technology. Thank you.
Well, we had a great start so far this morning. I loved, besides Don's and Governor Murphy's speech, I did love Governor Murphy's shoes, his casual sneakers. So Don, I wonder if it'd be okay if I wore sneakers like that to work, go casual. Okay. Thank you, Michelle. Great to be here with all of you this morning. Our first panel is drawing from diverse perspectives from both the private sector and the public sector. And we're going to build on Don's and the governor's remarks and dive a little deeper into the specific needs of growth companies in the tech ecosystem and surface some specific policy ideas to address those needs in New Jersey. We'll try to keep the discussion moving quickly, lively, and on point. And so it's my honor to introduce our first panel, some of my favorite people to work with in this area in the last few years. First, Jay Body is both an entrepreneur and policy leader. Jay is founder and chief technology officer. Come on up, Jay. Chief technology officer of Brand Project, and also, as Governor Murphy mentioned, was co-chair of Governor Murphy's Technology Transition Committee. Kathleen Coviello is a leader in New Jersey's Economic Development Authority as vice president of the Technology and Life Sciences Division. And Kathy is very involved in venture capital and tech investing in New Jersey. Dan Borick is co-managing partner of Newark Venture Partners, venture capital firm and tech accelerator, which has already attracted dozens of startups to Newark. And Dan has previously worked for Google and venture capital firms in New York City. And finally, Aisha Glover is the president and CEO of the Newark Community Economic Development Corporation, and Aisha was previously vice president at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So jumping right in, guys, we've heard reference to this already this morning. In the days of Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla, Alexander Graham Bell, New Jersey was the innovation capital in the nation. As we know, New Jersey has since been dethroned by the likes of California and Massachusetts. What needs to be done for New Jersey to gain its innovation superiority, and what role should government play? And I'd like to start with Kathleen. At the EDA, I know you already have a number of key programs trying to attract and support tech companies' innovation. Can you briefly mention a few of those and tell us about what is working?
Okay, great. Thanks, Colin. Happy to. So, we heard the governor this morning talk about a lot of the ecosystem is here with the talent that we have in New Jersey. And part of the challenge I think that we see is messaging and getting the messaging out. And as Colin mentioned and the governor mentioned, the EDA has some of those tools in place to start today. And there's a few in particular in this innovation economy that we've seen work, and we'd love to see them enhance more in the state. So in particular, our incubator in North Brunswick to support life science innovators has been up and running for 15 years now, and we've seen some tremendous success stories out of that incubator. I was at a ribbon cutting ceremony last week for a company called GeneWiz. They started with two co-founders, two scientists. They came out of New York. They came to our incubator facility where they needed wet lab space. At the ribbon cutting last week, they told me they have over 800 employees in the state of New Jersey. They have offices opening in Germany, in Israel, in China, in France. So that's a great example of a small investment that is very meaningful in helping these companies grow in the state. And if you're not familiar with the incubator, it's a tremendous resource in the central part of the state, again, supporting life science companies. So that's one example I'd point to. The EDA is also an investor in venture funds. So Newark Venture Partners, we heard from Don about all of the impact that has had. We are thrilled to see it grow and flourish. I got to meet with Don firsthand 5 years ago, 6 years ago maybe, with Colin, and see the press release and see Don work towards that initiative. And the investment from the EDA was really viewed in a double bottom line perspective. So we wanted to see the jobs, and we look for a return from our investors. And we're confident with those professional managers managing the money and making the investment choices that will happen. The EDA has a history of investing in venture funds. We've committed over $50 million to a series of venture funds, and we look at those funds and how they multiply the dollars that we put in them into the New Jersey economy. We've seen over a 50 times multitude of our dollars invested in a fund to how many dollars go into New Jersey companies. There's a few other funding initiatives that the governor also mentioned, which is the sale of your net operating loss. That is an extremely powerful tool that we have in New Jersey, not only to sell your losses, but to sell your R&D tax credits. Celgene will tell you when they were founded and on rough times, that was what kept them in business. And now look at the Celgene story as a multinational company as well. And getting the message out on the availability of those funds is key to part of the initiative in building the innovation economy. The angel investor tax credit would be the last one that I would mention. Again, a small start at a $25 million pool. When we talk about bringing investors from out of state and out of country into New Jersey and helping them build our innovation economy, what we've seen is over 40% of the individuals or corporations that take advantage of that tax credit are from outside New Jersey. And it's fairly unique, I believe, in the state of New Jersey that out-of-state investors get this tax credit. So if you're not familiar with it, it's a 10% tax credit for anyone who invests in a New Jersey company. And that includes foreign investors, it includes trusts, it includes angels. It's across the gamut. And there's discussions on how to enhance that. So I think that needs to be part of the conversation as well.
Thank you very much. So Kathleen, you mentioned the angel investor tax credit. There's currently a bill pending in the legislature that would increase that. Dan, with Newark Venture Partners, you've already attracted in just the last 2 years thousands of applicants from around the world to apply to be part of MVP. And you already have dozens who have been in the accelerator. Do you think increasing the angel tax credit would make a difference, or what other ideas do you have to increase capital?
I think increasing the angel tax credit would certainly make a difference, but I think it has to be part of a larger holistic program around influencing capital flows into the startup economy in New Jersey. So I guess if we look at an example, in the state right across the river in New York, there's 7,000 startups in New York City right now. There's an estimate that they're creating about $81 billion of economic output and 326,000 jobs in total. So how did that get to be over really what's been the last 10 years? Because the startup ecosystem in New York, as Jay knows, really wasn't very vibrant until kind of the mid-2000s. And that's a couple things from a capital flow perspective. There's a program that allows some of the New York State pension funds to invest in New York-based managers. I'd love to see a program like that. I know it's been tried out in New Jersey, but we'd like to see more robust programs in New Jersey that allow capital that's already here in the state to invest in managers and companies that are based here in the state. I think things like the angel tax credit are great. I think you have to target capital gains taxes because when you think of what happens when you sell your company, and we have a number of companies here today that hopefully will go through this one day, you have to pay capital gains. You have to pay it at the federal level, and then you have to pay ordinary income at the state level. So if we can reduce capital gains burdens, and this is one of Jay's core ideas for startups at liquidity, then we're going to influence where people want to base their startups. So those are two ideas that I think, in addition to the angel tax credit, we should really be focused on.
And Colin, if I can too, there's even been some discussion about taking the angel tax credit and incentivizing folks to invest in funds. So I know, not a lot of folks see kind of the fundraising process for funds and how difficult it
That's right.
is, and you know firsthand,
Yeah.
right? And so we heard about Don talk about all the wealth that's on the sidelines, and so there's been discussion on, is that an opportunity to make that another qualified investment vehicle under that angel tax credit program, that at the time of investment into a fund, let the professional managers manage those funds and work to that double bottom line and incentivize some of this private capital that's sitting on the sidelines to invest in funds that will invest in New Jersey companies.
And that's a good segue, Jay. You have a proposal for a tax abatement program for capital gains on liquidity events for founders, encouraging them to stay in New Jersey, move their company in New Jersey and stay here. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. A couple of years ago, I looked at, my background is I'm a New Jersey native. I spent several years in the West Coast when I built my own startup over there, and then I also worked at Microsoft before that. And I really looked at, what are the incentives a founder has when they build a company? And it's not like, hey, I'm looking forward to getting a W-2 paycheck. It's like, I'm looking forward to the liquidity event and exit event down the road. So when you really look at the motivation of a founder, they want to make it very, attractive for them to start a company somewhere where they'll have the maximum value of their startup, which is why they're doing it in Silicon Valley or New York, but also where they can keep the maximum amount of gains when they do something meaningful. So our proposal is very simple, and Don Katz mentioned this earlier, and then Don and I were at the dinner with the governor several weeks ago, and I brought this up over there, and it had a lot of enthusiasm with this other CEOs in the room. And the idea is that if you are a New Jersey company in the innovation economy, or you move your company to New Jersey and you have a liquidity event, you don't pay capital gains on that liquidity event, or you don't pay New Jersey ordinary income tax on the liquidity event, and that applies not only to the founders, but to the employees as well, too. So if you have an ESOP program where it's much more attractive for employees to be in New Jersey versus New York City, where they'd end up paying 13% additional taxes on, their gains, it could make New Jersey very attractive very quickly. It gets us even better than Pennsylvania. It makes us as attractive as Washington State, where Amazon and Microsoft are, and they've enjoyed a lot of benefits of the tax benefits there, or Austin, Texas, where a lot of startups from California are moving to Austin, Texas over here.
Nice. So Aisha, you are on the ground in Newark every day trying to attract companies. Some you proactively reach out to, others they have an interest in coming in, you're trying to close the deal. Do you think any of the ideas mentioned so far today would make a difference?
For sure. And, and I think also tying that back to employee stock ownership and cooperatives is key to what the mayor is focused on right now. We have an entire employee ownership initiative, and I think it kind of dovetails nicely with the tech sector. One of the reasons why we are interested in and focused on tech, ironically enough, I was initially brought on to focus on manufacturing and tech, and then my role somehow morphed a little bit. But the sector, as Don mentioned, just really supporting job creation in general and job creation in other areas, so sparking 4 to 5 additional jobs, and that entire sector really being a pathway to the middle class. And so us thinking about how do we not get in the way, quite frankly, some of the questions I was thinking about, what can the government do to support? I think first and foremost is kind of like the doctor's mantra, right, which is first do no harm, right? So if we could do what we can to make sure that we're not getting in the way, that we're supporting the sector, we're helping to spark innovation where we can, creating incubators and accelerators. One of the state's largest incubators is right here in Newark, and we have about 4 others in addition to co-working spaces and accelerators. So I think really at the core of that is figuring out how we make sure that tech remains inclusive. I was kind of chuckling at the name of the event today, A Tale of Tech Cities, because it makes me think of a tale of 2 cities in New York City, right? And so if we start with that and that understanding that the approach needs to be equitable and inclusive, and it's one of the reasons why we value having the Audibles of the world here, the Panasonics, and then also the Equal Spaces and the Dream Play Media, right? Because that ecosystem is important not just for corporations, but it is important to spark the next generation of startups, right? We're only going to retain talent if the city is attractive to millennials, if it's inclusive and exciting and dynamic. Otherwise, New Jersey will continue to remain being kind of a gateway to New York, and that's not what we want. That's not what we're trying to support. So at the core of that innovation, making sure that we're pushing ourselves to think inclusively and equitably, because that just adds to the dynamism and the character of the city, and will ultimately help with attraction and retention, not just of corporations, but of the individuals that work there.
Great. So mentioning New York, New Jersey has attracted a fraction of the venture capital investments that New York has. So there's been a couple of references to the McKinsey report today. From 2010 to 2014, New Jersey attracted $1,500 per capita in venture investment, well below the over $9,000 per capita in Massachusetts, about half of what Pennsylvania has attracted in 2016 alone, and a fraction of what New York has attracted. Why is that? I'll toss it out to anybody.
I gave a TEDx talk a couple of years ago, and innovation all comes down to having founders wanting to build something somewhere. I think, my biggest thesis is if you have founders who really come in and build companies, they're going to, create that ecosystem. They're going to hire the employees. And the great thing about today's world is capital is very movable. Like 20 years ago, even 15 years ago, capital stayed in Silicon Valley or New York City. Now you have an interesting idea in Idaho, like Douala, for example. They'll get hundreds of millions in funding. VCs don't care. So the nice thing is capital should be coming here, but it isn't, because we're not attracting the founders here. And not all the things have come together where founders have said, hey, I want to move my company to New Jersey. I'll give you one great example that happened to me. About 5.5 years ago when I, or about 4 years ago when I moved to Jersey, and, my biggest investment to that date was, $1 million in a food company. The CEO and I got into my parents' 2003 Altima and drove up and down the turnpike looking at factories we would, build. The places we could take over to build a factory. And it was incredibly hard for the CEO to work with the administration at that time to get incentives figured out, or figure out all the different programs he could take advantage of to get a facility that fits the type of funding that he had at that time over there. It was extremely difficult. Fast forward 4 years now, this company is almost $1 billion company. I was talking with the CEO the other day. Him and I are very close, just because I was the first investor in there, and we're still one of the biggest shareholders. But I was like, hey, remember how difficult it was for us to get into Jersey? I'd love to, consider that again. And instead of Jersey, he opened his facility up in Maryland. They're going to hire 1,000 people going to be employed there by November. The Governor Hogan of Maryland, having him play golf with him every other month, because it's such an exciting thing. That should be New Jersey. So I think, we have to do a better job of making founders excited about being in New Jersey. And I think a lot of great stuff is being done by New York Venture Partners. Just amazing what they're doing. I think Asbury Park, and Gary Matola is one of my LPs in my fund. He's doing amazing things over there. Bell Works, where I have an office. Ralph and Somerset are doing great things over there. So I think we're building those infrastructures slowly over there. And what Jet did with Hoboken. So we're getting some of the infrastructure there. We need the founders to get excited about why New Jersey is a great value for them, and make sure that we could keep employees here as well too.
Yeah, and I think what I'd add to that is it's hard to get people excited about a state. People get excited about local communities, and that goes back to, I think, what Don was saying, and what the governor's point was focused on around building communities. I'm based here in Newark. My dad grew up here. My grandfather grew up here, so I'm repping Newark. But I see the vital importance of also developing other cities in New Jersey. So you have these local ecosystems, because capital flows to ecosystems. Startups flow to ecosystems. People get excited about moving to Jersey City, to Hoboken, Newark. And so what can you do to attract more founders to your city? In a way, we should be asking the founders in the room. We have Sam over at One Huddle. We have Erica at Hire. Sam, raise your hand. Sam, what got you to move to Newark?
People, opportunity, access to talent. We're able to bring people from all over to one location. And, I saw a city that wanted to support us.
So that access to talent is critical, and getting people to come and live in a city and stay in the environment is really important. What we're seeing in Newark Venture Partners is the first place you have to look for great founders is locally. We do attract founders internationally, and that's one of our points of focus. We attract founders from Brooklyn and founders from Manhattan, but there's so many great founders, well-educated, doing really interesting things here in New Jersey, and that's like your first line of focus. Get them to stay, incentivize them to stay, and build around that community, because that's the low-hanging fruit. So I think it's about how do you build better community, focus on cities, focus on economic development within the cities. That attracts talent, that attracts millennials who want to live in cities, and you build out from there.
And
So
what's,
just to,
go ahead.
just to quickly add to that, the funding goes to ecosystems, right? As Dan just said. What I think we probably need to do a better job at in the city of Newark is making sure that folks understand the ecosystem that's here, and it doesn't feel like this one-off anomaly of NVP is tremendously successful, right? And so it's kind of up to each of us to help make sure that we market and promote and share all those success stories so it feels more like an ecosystem and not one-off successes, if that makes sense. So for us to kind of underscore that overall message of what's here, I think kind of sharing some of those stories more intentionally will just kind of further help promote and attract additional investment dollars.
Well, and in MVP in particular, a lot of investors that came in were bigger established companies. And Aisha, you made the point to me that we can't just focus only on startups, but on even established companies that recognize they need to retool, they need to innovate. And if they get the message and they know that they need to adapt for the future, we should be there to help them as well. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Sure. So, like I said, one of the areas of focus that I was initially brought on for was around manufacturing, and I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity in the manufacturing sector, in advanced manufacturing, in a little bit more niche or artisanal manufacturing, particularly where the intersection of design, manufacturing, and tech kind of lie. And around TDL, Newark, everybody kind of boasts our location, but to really kind of double down efforts and to look much more closely at logistics. PNCT is really leading in this space, which is based in the Port Newark Container Terminal. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities in that space. And in terms of equity, particularly in the manufacturing sector, lower skilled, lower educated individuals can make up to 60% higher in that sector than they would in service sector positions, right? And so that's why we want to focus there. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for some of us in the tech sector to think more inclusively about how we define tech. Oftentimes, folks just say tech, right? And not really understanding all the subsectors beneath them. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to just make better linkages within the tech sector and really think a lot more innovatively about how we're onboarding that talent.
Colin, if I could, I would add, I think that messaging is really key. When you look at the Pitchbook results, New Jersey doesn't even stand alone in reporting, right? We're a metro to New York and a metro to Philadelphia. And so just kind of teasing out those companies that are getting funding is important. And then really to marry on to Dan's statement on the talent is so key. You know, I sit here and I think about Newark and David Rosenberg from Aero Farms. So great example of somebody who is a serial entrepreneur. His first company, Highcrete, was funded by the New Jersey Technology Council's first fund. So he had capital here, we had talent here. When Aero Farms was started, it actually started in New York, and then David brought it back across the river into Newark. So, you know, celebrating those stories, getting the messaging out, and really having those repeat entrepreneurs stay here because the capital here and folks are funding them, you know, like my two fellow panelists, is really important, I think, in continuing those types of successes.
So, Kathleen, to put you on the spot a little bit, you've highlighted some of the successes that EDA has made in investments, but is the pool of capital big enough? What about Dan's idea of diverting some of the money from pension funds to invest in venture?
Yeah, so, you know, I think everybody on the panel knows I'm always saying it's never enough. I wish I had a big war chest of funding to invest. There has been limited allocation specifically for this. It's kind of been a one-off scenario, and those one-off scenarios has worked very well, I believe, for the state and for the EDA, both from a job creation perspective and a leveraging capital perspective, as I mentioned earlier. Pensions did have a program where they took pension dollars and gave it out to a private manager who invested in funds with a mission to invest in New Jersey companies. it's not the responsibility of the EDA, but it's my understanding that from a financial perspective, it did well, but not necessarily from a job creation perspective. It's a little bit tough, right? Because pensions has a fiduciary responsibility, a little bit different than an economic development responsibility to grow jobs in the state. There's got to be a happy medium somewhere in there, I think. Maybe the right dollar amount to help fund that is the right answer. The managers that were chosen weren't necessarily in New Jersey enough. And that's really what we find at the EDA is finding managers that are here because it is such a diverse ecosystem. It's hard to find those great entrepreneurs if you're not here and active. You know, and that's why, you know, again, I'm going to keep pointing to Newark, but having them here and part of the community is really contributing to the success, and then bringing the entrepreneurs in here as well.
So MVP is really working. We have a tech ecosystem evolving in Newark. Is Newark the only tech ecosystem in New Jersey right now?
Yes, it is.
Well, I think, you know, if anyone has taken a look at the Bell Works that's been revitalized in Homedale, I think that's becoming a really good, interesting tech ecosystem, not as much on the consumer side as Newark, but more on the enterprise tech side over there. I know Asbury Park is doing a lot of work. Working very closely with the folks at Princeton University to try to get a little bit more entrepreneurial hub going over there, and also with some of the people at Rutgers University. So, I mean, like Dan said, I think Dan has a great point here when he said that it's not about the state, it's about the community. He's absolutely right, because if I said, hey, does anyone want to move to Stockton, California to build a tech startup, you'd probably say no. But Silicon Valley, yes, right? So I think it's about building those communities, and we are seeing a couple of them mushroom up. And, you know, one of the things we talked about, it'd be great if, like, Newark was known as, like, the consumer tech capital, and Homedale was, like, the enterprise, and Asbury for creative tech. Like, you know, there are those things that are mushrooming up, which is very exciting.
So like Asbury Park could be surf tech.
Surf tech, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So on that community point, Dan, how an MVP's model is both an investment return, but attracting these companies to Newark to have a return on the community. Can you tell us how that's working?
Yeah, and you know, this is sort of Don's core innovation around the idea of Newark Venture Partners. We're a place-based venture capital firm, which really fundamentally means that we're based here in Newark. We're trying to find great companies that are located anywhere in the U.S., anywhere internationally, and get them to do a tie back to Newark along with our investment. So that's our fundamental model. It's different than maybe other folks that are just investing in companies in the city. And we think that, you know, there's an economic driver of attracting outside companies to move to Newark, as well as funding companies that are based here. So, you know, so far it's going well. We track things like Don talked about, sort of visits to the city. You know, we're north of 5,000 now in terms of people who come here for our demo days, for meetings with our companies, for other sponsored events. We have 46 companies with just under 400 people who've raised, you know, north of $30 million of total capital to date across the portfolio. So the number's small as we start out investing in early stage companies, but growing over time. And so those are sort of the factors that we're looking at of having a sort of double bottom line impact. And we go back to the number I shared about New York, their ecosystem. So 7,000 startups, 326,000 jobs, $81 billion of economic impact. So it works when it gets to scale. We're just starting out, but we sort of see the early signs of impact.
But you highlighted that these companies have already raised $30 million in capital, but not all from MVP. So
Right.
MVP's investment has already seen multiples of X capital brought to Newark.
Right, and that's a sort of a core, you know, idea. So the idea of venture capital existing mutually with economic returns isn't, you know, and job creation isn't something new. I mean, if you look at Google, which is now up to 75,000 total employees, Kleiner Perkins and Sequoia Capital were the initial investors in Google. Didn't set out to create jobs and have an impact, but that was just sort of the byproduct of their investment. And so one of the things that Sequoia and Kleiner Perkins also realized is that there's a multiplier effect from your dollars going into a company. So starting out, we have to build a brand for Newark Venture Partners, and we build that brand by me and my partner Tom, who's in the audience today, going out, meeting with companies and making good investments. As those companies grow and produce good financial returns, other investors see that as a positive, and we attract outside capital. And that's the multiplier effect we're trying to get to. So $1 million of MVP capital might lead to $10 million or $15 million or $50 million of outside capital. Now, if we've done our job well and those companies are based here in Newark, that outside capital is actually flowing in to start up ecosystem here. So that's what's going to happen, hopefully, at scale as we build the business and build our brand.
One thing I would add to that, and one thing I'm actually liking a lot about what's happening in the New Jersey tech ecosystem is that on the venture side, there's not a lot of venture dollars here, but the venture firms that are here are very collaborative. So like, for example, the New York Venture Partners and the EDA, we actually look at a lot of deals together with the Tech Council Ventures, which is part of the New Jersey Tech Council. We work very collaboratively looking at deals. So like when I do an investment in a company in New Jersey, I'm actually sharing it with everyone saying, do you find this interesting? Do you find this exciting? And, we want more partners to come to the table and be involved in that company because we just know it'll give it a better chance of success.
And
we haven't hit that phase where it's hyper-competitive Silicon Valley or New York City where we're stabbing each other in the back.
Right.
I hope we get there where, that would be a great thing for us, but Dan and I are friends still right now.
Yeah, and we're co-investors in a company called Vidya, which is 2 offices, one in Holmdel and one in Newark, and they've now raised about $8.5 million in total capital to date. Our capital in is less than $1.5 million, so we attracted outside capital from outside the state of New Jersey to come in and help that company grow. One Huddle, and I'll call on Sam again. Sorry I put you on the spot before. One Huddle just raised a $3 million Series A round of financing. They have 12 employees. They're based here in Newark. Newark Venture Partners' capital contribution over the lifetime of One Huddle is $750,000. So it's sort of that idea of sort of multiplier effect.
Yeah.
Starting with your investment, then their broader fundraising through either seed or Series A, and on to the job creation. Don talked about earlier, Enrico Moretti, a professor out in California, of all places, noted that every tech company creates a number of jobs in a local ecosystem. Aisha, Don and Governor Murphy spoke earlier about the opportunity zones under a recently enacted federal bill. I know you were very involved with the governor's administration in recommending tracks within Newark. Is that going to help us attract more capital right here into this area of Newark?
Yes, I believe so. And also just kind of identifying the particular areas that we wanted to focus on, I think was really representative of a broader strategy, right? So in addition to the downtown tracks, making sure that we were covering industrial areas, that we were covering areas within each of the 5 wards of the city, right? And so oftentimes Newark, like many cities, gets kind of ridiculed for its downtown development. And so it was very important for the mayor to make sure that the corridors throughout the wards were also represented. And so I think the opportunity zones, the UEZ, knock on wood, we're still waiting for him to sign. I'm looking at Joe Kelly. I think you're looking around for Joe Kelly too, Joe? I think the combination of the opportunity zones, the UEZ, and then just Newark's overall affordability, right, especially when you're looking at it comparatively to New York City, is going to help us attract additional investment. And again, not just in the downtown core, but throughout the wards, and kind of making sure we're making a good balance between commercial areas and industrial areas.
We're going to go.
Do you think the audience knows what the opportunity zones are?
Probably some people do, but it'd be worth a summary if anyone wants to jump in
I'm
on
going
that.
to defer to Dan. He's the expert on them.
Yeah, so opportunity zones, it was an original idea as a standalone bill. Tim Scott and Senator Booker got it inserted into the tax legislation that went through at the end of this year. And what it does is allows you to defer capital gains taxes on equities that are owned. So if you sell your stock, you don't have to pay capital gains. You can roll over the total value of the investment and the profit into an investment in opportunity zones. Opportunity zones are defined as urban or rural areas that are underproductive, I guess, for lack of a better word. And in so doing, you're deferring your cap gains for up to 10 years, and you don't have to pay any cap gains on any value that you realize from your initial investment into an opportunity zone fund. So it's a great way to, as Don said, unlock all the locked up capital gains in stock that's sitting around from tech founders and others. And so it's really going to be, I think, a big opportunity for New Jersey.
And it's able to be invested both in real estate and in equity. And so what we're seeing is a lot of folks from outside the state because New Jersey was one of the first across the finish line with the governor approving what will qualify for opportunity zones in New Jersey. There's a great interactive website where you can go on and find those locations, Newark being one of the high concentration pockets. And so, I think it's 180 days, someone told me, from when you have those capital gains to when you can invest them. We're waiting for the federal government to release all the rules around it. But think about anybody who's made money in the market, as hopefully many have as of late, who don't want to pay the taxes on it. And so we're seeing a lot of interest from real estate investors from across the river who want to come over and buy properties and fill them up with tech companies and then invest in those tech companies as well. So I really think, as we heard the governor say, this is really an important tool for us to add on to some of the other pieces that we're talking about here today.
And do you think we can leverage that not only for real estate investment, but also for investment in operating companies?
Yes, so equity investment and real estate investment.
And the rules are being drafted by Treasury and the IRS right now. But the original idea behind the act was for operating companies. And so if the rules are drafted correctly, then we should be able to take advantage of that.
Yep.
Fantastic. Let's open up to the audience and see if we have any questions. Hopefully we've inspired some thought process here. So any questions in the audience? Yes.
Hi, I'm Judith Sheff with New Jersey Institute of Technology. I wanted to ask, one of the challenges we sometimes see is with both our international students who have come here who would like to stay and start up businesses, but they're not able to stay because of some of the visa issues. And we've seen some other programs from other states where they have these startup visa type programs to help attract and retain the international talent who's come to our higher education institutions to be working on some of their tech startups when they leave. And I was wondering if any of the people on the panel have any comments relative to that.
One thing I'll add to that is, we do talk quite a lot about we look at international and non-New Jersey the same way. There's a lack of smart people moving into the state, and we want to try to change that trend where we want people who go to school in New York or Pennsylvania or Boston to move into the state over here. So I think the first thing that we're looking to do is try to how to get those people back or get them into New Jersey, and how to keep the smart people from leaving New Jersey. I think that's the first priority number one and priority number two that we're looking at. We've also looked at a lot of stuff for international students, a lot of international companies to move to New Jersey. So we've actually done some stuff. An entity that of CEOs of Central Jersey called Brand New Jersey, have looked at saying, how do we get foreign companies to put a beachhead in New Jersey versus New York or Connecticut? And we've been looking at those efforts first because we think that might be more interesting, because we could get a couple of people coming here versus working on a student level, which is harder because that's more of a federal, you're under much more of a federal jurisdiction than you are a state jurisdiction.
Yeah, we've also been focused on companies internationally. I don't know, is Erica from Hire here? She's not here. She's one of our founders, and they're from Toronto. So not quite as far away as we'd like to think, but we also have startups from Israel, and we have startups from the UK and Toronto and Canada. So we've been focusing on that sort of international landing pad idea.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions from the audience? I think we have a microphone coming.
My question for the panelists is, there's a lot of talk about the fact that women are not getting engaged, and also specifically on the venture capital side that they're totally underfunded. So maybe you could share some statistics or firsthand experience about how to draw women into what you're doing.
Well, I'll take this, but I'm sure everyone has an opinion about this on the panel. First of all, you have to sort of decide. This isn't just about female founders; it's about diverse founders, founders of color, female founders. You have to be purposeful about creating a pipeline to find great founders of color and female founders. And Tom and I have been really focused on that at Newark Venture Partners, because unless you try, you go to the right events, you go to the female founder events, you go to the founders of color events. You sort of put your name out there as a firm that's looking for investments in diverse founder ecosystem. You're not going to get those inbound points of interest. We actually have 2 female investment professionals in Newark Venture Partners, because the other thing that we've noticed in the ecosystem is that there aren't enough women or investors of color making investments, and people tend to have implicit bias and in some cases probably invest in people that look like them or grew up like them or act like them. And so I think those are two things. One, you have to be purposeful about identifying the pipeline and going after diverse founders. And two, it helps to have diversity on your investment team.
So 2 quick stats that I'll share is women of color are creating more startups. They're the fastest growing sector within entrepreneurship and the least funded. So overall, women get about 5% of funding, and women of color get about 1%. So I think Dan is right. The issue is in the connection and in identifying. We are out there. We are growing and quickly growing, outgrowing many other sectors, but it's identifying those high growth companies and opportunities for investment that's lacking.
One thing, okay, sorry.
Just to add to Dan's comment on the pipeline, so I think it's really important that we look at the education for the STEM side as well, and making sure that at those early, educational levels, we are supporting diversity. And you heard the governor speak a little bit about, plans on how to do that and how to fund that. And I think that goes a long way. I also sit on the board of the R&D Council in New Jersey, and they have a governor's STEM scholar that looks at diversity and supporting diversity and funding initiatives for folks for community colleges and college level that wouldn't ordinarily have an opportunity to go to college. So I think, it's about at those early stages, all of us in this room that are in the tech ecosystem having those conversations with, the local schools in communities about the career paths that are available for folks is important as well.
One of the things I'm most proud of in doing venture capital is about 40% of my portfolio is either minority founders or women founders. And I think a lot of it comes to just the fact that, we look at the world a little bit differently. Like I'm an immigrant here. I've experienced discrimination, so I know how painful it feels on the other side of the equation, especially on the funding side. I'll give a good example. One of my fastest growing companies that we have in our portfolio is a company called Daily Harvest. It's 70% women. When we met the founder, she had just had her son, so, a new mother, and she was having a hard time raising venture because there was a bias that, will she be able to dedicate the time needed to build a startup? Guys don't get asked that question, right? Like, you have a son, great, you should be able to still work 80 hours a week. We invested in her because we loved what she was doing. She was building a business that, we joked, it was selling smoothies on the internet to millennials, right? That's what that's Daily Harvest as a company. And, fast forward to a year and a half later, we were raising venture capital dollars, and she's pregnant with her second kid, right? And, we were raising money, and it was almost Christmas time, and she's about to give birth, and she's like, hey, a lot of VCs are kind of, I could see that bias hitting again. They're like, now you're going to have 2 kids, blah, blah, blah. And we just said, F them. We don't care about those VCs. If they're not going to love you for what you're building and who you are, then who cares? Fast forward a couple of weeks later, she raises $50 million, right? So, I think a lot of it also comes down to just, having more people in the venture world who are not going to let these stereotypes dictate what types of investments they made. I mean, one of the worst lines I've ever heard in venture capital is from one of the most famous VCs in Silicon Valley. He said that, the typical successful founder is 2 white guys who went to an Ivy League or XYZ type of school. And someone said, yeah, that's because all the people investing in them are pretty much white guys who went to the same school. So the more diversification we have represented in tech, the better I think, the community will be. And for me, one of the biggest things I'd love to see in New Jersey is I want New Jersey to be really a rewarding place for women and minority founders. I think that's a beachhead that New Jersey could own. I think that's representative of the culture that we have here. It's very inclusive. I've lived in Silicon Valley. I built a company there. Silicon Valley is not an inclusive culture. I'm just going to let that reality sink in for a second. I think New York is a very inclusive culture. I think they've done some great stuff over there, but I think New Jersey could own that mantle over here someday.
That's awesome. Thank you, Jay. Any other questions from the audience?
Thank you. Full disclosure, I'm a reporter, so. I hear a lot about, the attracting jobs and attracting people to the state, and I don't think that is a problem. We do have a lot of spillover coming from places where people can escape the state very quickly, and that's been sort of the trend of who's moving into New Jersey. So I see this sort of vicious cycle emerging where cities will look at companies and be like, oh, it'd be great if we get, so-and-so company like Amazon, and then we can, work on our infrastructure and we'll work on making things better. At the same time, the companies are looking and saying, well, if that doesn't exist already, why should I move here? So I want to hear your thoughts on that sort of dynamic.
So the beauty about Newark is that at our peak population, we were almost 500,000 people, right? And so we're built for this. We're built for Amazon and the next Amazon. We certainly have the infrastructure and the capacity to handle a company that size that's bringing 50,000 jobs. But I think what you're also getting at, and which we have to be mindful of, is transportation, issues with that infrastructure, right? And so even though we were at that peak population at some point, what would it actually physically look like to have 50,000 additional bodies kind of taking mass transportation, walking the streets, needing to identify housing, adequate housing for them, and so on and so forth. I think at the end of the day, starting with a certain level of infrastructure will certainly help, but making sure that those conversations are, and public-private partnerships are actually there, because that's the other side of the infrastructure that's needed. How can we actually make this happen, plan for it, make sure it's purposeful and intentional, right? And so you're ramping up. It's not drop here, there's 50,000 jobs tomorrow, but none of these sectors can have this conversation alone. And to what the governor said earlier, and Don was saying as well, the way that you've seen the community kind of mobilize around the HQ2 effort is really indicative of what has to happen in order to prepare for an Amazon or another company of that sheer size, because we have to have the state involved. We have to have New Jersey Transit involved. We have to have the private sector involved. We have to have developers involved, thinking about how we're planning out for housing, amenities, entertainment, everything, right? And so I think it just starts with the actual physical infrastructure and then the foundation of what that true public-private partnership needs to look like.
And if I could just add, I know we're in Newark today, but the governor's announcement on the hub in New Brunswick kind of was very thoughtful and mindful around some of those pieces, about the train system that's running into New Brunswick, about the innovation from the education economy. I think that's a big piece of the infrastructure and the job creation and the training and getting the companies that are going to locate there to work with the universities, I think, is a very important and relevant discussion, both for New Brunswick and for Newark as well, because we have so many great education partners here.
I think those are both really, really strong points. The other thing I would focus on is, per the McKinsey report, which has been cited a few times today, there's this underrepresentation of the medium-sized companies in New Jersey. So companies that are under 10 years old, that are fewer than 500 employees, those are still pretty big, whether they're standalone companies or whether they're going to be subsidiaries or second offices of other companies. You still have to build out the infrastructure, but you don't have the same challenge of bringing those those medium-sized companies here that you do with the really large companies. Their sort of concerns are a little bit different, but they're creating the most jobs, right? That's one of the point takeaways for me from the McKinsey report. Those are the fastest growing companies, and they're adding the most jobs to the economy. So, I think focusing there, the Amazon HQ2 would be fantastic, but a lot of these medium-sized companies are, I think, where we're going to find a lot of opportunity, and maybe there's sort of fewer strains around bringing them here. And I'll just go back to the Google example again. So Google has 8,000 people in New York right now. That's huge economic output. But in 2002, there were only 25 people who worked for Google in New York. So sometimes you also have to grow with these larger companies when they open up their second office.
Yep. And we see that particularly on the biotech side in the companies that participate in the NOL program. So generally they have to have about 10 employees and been in business 5 years to maximize that program, but they have to have under 225. So I cited Celgene earlier, who participated in that program with just a handful of folks and now is a multinational company. So great point.
And one thing I'd add is, one of the things that gets me excited about New Jersey is the Governor Murphy's focus on innovation and young companies. I think, him, coming from the business world, really understands that, innovative companies, young companies are really going to be the engines that drive future growth for the state and give us the economic impact we need. And I was at an event with him at Princeton University a couple of months ago where he said that he's going to focus much more on how do we give the right incentives and credits to the younger companies versus the bigger companies. And I think that's going to have a meaningful impact in terms of attracting those younger companies over here. And like Dan said, the younger companies don't have that massive infrastructure need saying, hey, I need to have a transit system here that could take 500 people from here to here. they just don't have that requirement. So if you can meet other needs of theirs, I think we could do a really good job of attracting them over here, especially if we start to become known as a very entrepreneur, startup-friendly state, which I think we're headed in that direction.
Yeah, they just need a few coffee shops, a couple bars.
Lattes every afternoon,
Yeah.
you know.
And internet.
Massages every 20 minutes, you know. Like, yeah.
I think we have time for one more question. Tom Wisniewski.
This will be dangerous right here.
Hey guys, Tom Wisniewski. I'm Dan's partner in all this, and I was sitting here thinking, what a great group of people we've all gathered here today. Thanks to Audible and all the people who arranged it. Taking a page out of what Don said, and just some startup mentality. From each of you, what is the ask to everyone in this room? Short answer: what would you like people in this room to do to help you with your mission?
That's a great question. I frequently talk about the struggle of public perception, and I think that each of us plays a role in that, and how we share our message and all the amazing things that are going on in both the city and the state. Right? I found the SNL skit to be funny, where it was Senator Booker saying, Newark's not going to win anyway. And it was kind of poking fun at the fact that there is this sentiment or belief that, Jersey, us being the butt of a joke, right? And so I think we all have a role in the marketing and messaging and promoting our city and our state, and in pushing out good stories and in the narrative that we tell. We have a phenomenal opportunity to leverage all of this momentum to make sure folks understand the tremendous amount of assets that the city and the state have to offer. Even myself kind of going through the HQ2 process over again and learning new facts about Jersey. As a Brooklyn girl, now a transplant, I have to say that there were many moments that I was surprised. And when I tour people around the city and when I talk to developers or investors, everyone leaves kind of pleasantly surprised and like, I had no idea. And so I think it's kind of up to all of us to make sure that we invest in significant, serious marketing for our city and our state, and that we individually take on this new narrative of Newark is where it's at, and New Jersey.
And Homedale.
And I think that's an important point, right? So we have all these little kind of clusters throughout the state, and pulling that messaging together, I think, is key. Different mediums resonate with folks differently. So, we're trying Twitter at the EDA and Facebook, and the governor is very, very active on Twitter. But I think the personal story, and if every person in this room tells the story about, 3 great entrepreneurs that they met or worked with or grew up in New Jersey, fortunately, I think we're on panels a lot and sharing this message, and I'm still out with people saying, this happened in New Jersey. I had 2 companies bought by Oracle in the last couple of years, and they're like, Oracle came to New Jersey and bought tech companies? I'm like, yes, because there's great technology being built here. So, again, just to add to Aisha's comment, I think it's our duty and responsibility for everybody here to do that and pull the pieces together.
Yeah, since my partner asked the question, I'm gonna pass, but I will say, if you know any great startups, send them our way.
Actually, first to me.
We'll co-invest.
Exactly. I think, when I had the honor of being on Governor Murphy's co-chair on the tech team, the theme that we had was how to make New Jersey the most rewarding place to build a company. Like, that was the entire theme. And I think what, we could all collectively do in this room, and 2 things I think about is, one is, let's work on the hard problems. New Jersey, when it was the innovation capital of the world, worked on really hard, interesting problems that had a global impact. So, let's work on stuff that's like deep artificial intelligence, deep, automation, deep on enterprise systems, deep on like IoT. Like, those are the things that I think, can have a really big impact, not just to the state, but to the entire planet as a whole. So I'd love to see like more innovation come out. And a lot of it sometimes comes down to just, someone says, hey, I have a couple of friends who started like a staffing company, so I'm gonna start a staffing company. And I'm like, no, you have all this talent here. You have all these engineers you can recruit from around the world. Build a product, build something that actually has more sustainability versus a 1x multiple staffing company. So like, I think a lot of it is just mentality of like, hey, let's build something bigger and better. I think the other thing is that, making New Jersey rewarding, it's like, if someone succeeds in New Jersey, they should want to stay here in New Jersey. They should want to like grow here in New Jersey and invest in New Jersey. And so that's some of the work that I'm doing with the governor's administration, is try to figure out how we can make sure that if you're successful in New Jersey, that you want to stay here and you want to, reload the talent pool here and rebuild and regrow that as well too.
Thank you guys very much.